Hi, everyone. Welcome. So glad you could join us again for the Grief Healing Telesummit. Top experts share their best holistic healing methods to transform grief into healing and living again. My name is Chelsea Hansen. I'm your host, founder of With Sympathy Gifts and Keepsakes, as well as Global Grace, the World Association of Spiritual Grief Healing. We have a very special guest for you today, Dr. Margaret Paul. And to give you a little background about Margaret, she's a best-selling author, popular Huffington Post writer, and co-creator of The Powerful Inner Bonding Self-Healing Process. And that is recommended both by actress Lindsay Wagner and singer Alanis Morissette. Margaret has also appeared on numerous radio and television shows, including Oprah. So welcome, Margaret. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and so tell us, you are going to be talking to us about unhealthy grief and grief from the loving adult, wounded self, and self-compassion. Right. So I think that'll be a lot of great information for us. But for people who aren't already familiar with your work, can you kind of tell us how you got started?
Well, I knew from the time I was a small child that I wanted to be a psychologist. It's just something that I knew inside of me. And so I became a traditional psychologist, which I practiced marriage and family counseling for 17 years, and I was not at all happy with the results of that. So I started looking around for a process that actually would help people, and that's when I met the co-creator, Dr. Erica Chopich, and she had half the inner bonding process, and I had half of it, and we put it together about 30 years ago, and so it's been evolving since that time, and it's become an extremely powerful process for me and for others, because I had tried all kinds of psychotherapy before that. I came from a very dysfunctional and very, very lonely and somewhat abusive childhood, and tried so many different ways of healing that didn't work for me. And so when inner bonding actually came through from spirit, and I started to practice it, I realized, wow, this is really powerful and really life-changing. So I feel so grateful for it, because it changed everything for me. It changed my entire life to really understand what it means to take responsibility for myself.
That's awesome. I'm so excited that you can share it with us. If you want to start telling us about how the process works for grief healing, we're very excited to hear about it.
Well, when people have lost somebody who's very, very important to them, I mean, of course, that is devastating. We miss that person, and we want to be with that person. And when we're grieving from a healthy state, what we're doing is we're bringing a lot of love and a lot of compassion to ourselves. We're allowing ourselves the feelings of grief. We're allowing these grief feelings to come up whenever they come up, to cry, to do whatever it is we have to do, so that the feelings move through us. Because what we don't want is feelings getting stuck inside our body. And when we're not operating as what we call the loving adult, and the loving adult is who we are when we're connected with a higher source of love. And this is part of what we teach people to do in inner bonding, is to learn to open to a higher source of love and wisdom and strength and power. And we need this higher source. We can't get through really painful losses without the comfort of spirit. So when we learn to open to that, and I can talk more about how people can do that, but when we learn to open to that and bring that in, we allow the feelings to move through us with compassion. But when we're not connected to that, we can get the feelings stuck. The feelings might scare us. We just may get stuck in the pain. We don't know how to let them move through. Life seems to stop because the feelings are not moving through. And one of the things that can happen with people who have lost somebody that they love is that if they felt like that person was their source of love, which is what happens a lot in relationships, is that people enter a relationship trying to get love, and they make that other person their source of love. And then if that person leaves or that person dies, they just feel devastated because they feel like their source of love has been cut off. But when we are actually connected with our true source of love, which is spirit, then we find that we can manage the losses because our source of love hasn't been cut off. It's still there. We can tap into it at any time. We miss this person. We're very, very sad that this person is gone. But when we have a spiritual belief system, like if somebody you love dies, when we have a spiritual belief system, we know we're going to see that person again. We know we're going to connect with them again when we leave the planet. So we know it's not this permanent kind of loss. It's a completely different kind of grief when we're not disconnected from our source of love, when we don't feel like we've lost that, and when we know that we're going to see that person again.
And then you'll kind of explain to us how we can cultivate this connection, correct?
Yes, if you'd like me to do that now, I can do that right now. So,
yeah,
what I'd like to do is go through a little bit the steps of the inner bonding process. Inner bonding is a 6-step process, and if I can go through the steps, and then I can help people see about connecting with spirit. So, step 1 of inner bonding is being willing to feel our feelings and take responsibility for them. The problem with so many really deep feelings like grief is that people might be feeling them, but they don't take responsibility for managing them because they don't know how. They never saw anybody manage deep feelings in a very loving and compassionate way. So step 1 is being willing to manage these feelings in a compassionate way. And compassion and love are feelings that we don't generate them in our body. They are feelings that come through us from our spiritual guidance. So in step 2, we move into what we call the intention to learn. Inner bonding has only 2 intentions. One is to protect against pain with some form of controlling behavior. Like if people lose somebody, they may, start to smoke or drink or overeat or turn to some other addiction to avoid their feelings. And the only other intention is to be open to learning about what's truly loving to ourselves and loving to others. So this is the key to spiritual connection, is our intention. Because spirit exists at a higher frequency than we do. We exist at a fairly low frequency so we can see each other, so that we're solid. But like if we existed at the frequency of, say, a hummingbird's wings, we wouldn't see each other very well. It's like we don't see radio waves or TV waves because they exist at a higher frequency than we see at. Well, spirit also exists at a higher frequency than we see at. But we can learn to raise our own frequency and hear and feel the guidance of spirit and feel the love and the compassion of spirit. And this has to do with our intention. So when our intention is to protect against pain and control things with our addictions or with our anger or with numbing out in different ways, staying up in our head, judging ourselves, then we lower our frequency. Anytime we are in anxiety, depression, guilt, shame, anger, we're lowering our frequency. Now, those are the wounded feelings of life that we cause by our disconnection from ourselves. But then there's the core feelings of life, like grief, like loneliness, like sadness and heartbreak and helplessness, all of which people feel when they lost somebody.
Yeah.
And these feelings, these are the feelings of life. These are the existential feelings of life that we could not manage when we were young. And so we learn to protect against them with all of our addictive, controlling ways. Well, now as adults, we need to learn to manage these feelings if we're going to get through grief. And so when we move into a true intention to learn about loving ourselves, we have to start with ourselves before we can go to others, that raises the frequency. And it's really amazing what happens, because when we truly want to be loving to ourselves, we truly want to lovingly manage our painful feelings, our heart opens up And that's what raises the frequency. That's what allows Spirit to connect to us. Spirit is always here. Spirit is always trying to connect to us. But when we shut our heart, when we close down, we can't connect to Spirit. So when we move into the intention to learn, that automatically opens the heart. The intention to learn about love. It's got to be about love. It's not like the intention to learn about the lottery numbers. It's about love. and so when that's our intention, is to learn about love, and especially about loving ourselves, the heart opens, our frequency goes up, and we get spiritually connected. And that's when people feel really great. You know, sometimes they just do it without realizing they're doing it, and they suddenly feel this lightness of being and this fullness in their heart, and colors look brighter, and they wonder how they got there. But with inner bonding, you can get there on purpose by consciously choosing the intention to learn. So step 2 of inner bonding is moving into the intention to learn, inviting the love and the compassion, the power, the presence, the comfort, the strength of Spirit into our heart. And
can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
I don't know if this is possible, but is there a way, that we can prevent our hearts from being shut down before we have to go through all this work to open them up? Or unfortunately, just the way we're raised, brought up, it's like a natural process where our hearts start to close.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anybody that grew up without having to close their heart to get by, because most people have a lot of pain. They've got a lot of loneliness. They've got a lot of helplessness, heartbreak as they're growing up. If there was any abuse, physical, emotional abuse, neglect, if there was bullying, if there was, just there's so many ways, whether it's at home or at school. And most of us did not have parents who knew how to keep their hearts open. And
I know. Yeah.
So we didn't learn how to lovingly manage. We didn't learn how to keep our hearts open and lovingly manage our feelings because we didn't see it anywhere. So I don't know anybody that really was able to keep their heart open. We needed to close our hearts. That's part of our survival. We needed to not feel as much in order to get through. And we needed to develop that survival. We have a survival mechanism in the base of our brain called the amygdala, and that's where all of our fear and false beliefs and reactions, or survival reactions, come from. And we needed them. And so, but now as adults, we get to heal that. We don't have to be operating that way because we're not helpless little kids.
Sure.
And now we get to learn how to open our heart at will. And that's what step 2 of inner bonding is about. It's about consciously opening your heart by moving into the intention to learn about loving yourself. And with practice, people can feel the warmth that comes in, the peace that comes in when you truly open to learning. So in step 2, we open to learning. In step 3, we bring that love that's coming into our heart down into our feeling self, down in the part that's feeling the grief and the heartbreak and the helplessness and the loneliness. And we embrace these feelings with the love and compassion that's coming through us from our spiritual guidance. We bring that down in, and when we do that, it's like if you had a child who's really devastated by something, and you're a loving parent, and you're holding that child with the utmost of love and gentleness and kindness and caring. What you're doing is that you're helping that child learn to manage their feelings, and you're giving them the space to allow those feelings to move through them. Well, that's what we're doing with ourselves when we hold ourselves in that way with so much compassion and kindness and gentleness. And that's what allows us to eventually move through the grief, is being that way with ourselves. If we keep our hearts closed, then that part of us, which we can call an inner child, I call the feeling self, our inner child, that part of us feels abandoned. We've cut off our source of love, and now we're cut off from our beloved who's left or died, and now we feel completely bereft because the person we were most connected to is gone, and we're not here. We've abandoned ourselves. And that's what causes grief to get stuck in the body. That's what causes people to be in grief for a very long time and not be able to move on with their lives. It's like they're a child who's just been left. Now, a child who's just been left doesn't move out of that bereft state. They stay there for a very long time, and that's what happens on the inner level. So it becomes vitally important for us to learn to connect and bring that love in and lovingly embrace our these very, very painful core feelings of loneliness and heartbreak and grief and helplessness over the situation.
And it's really giving us the power to take control of the situation by learning how to do this, so that gives us some hope and faith that, yeah, we can feel better. We do love ourselves. So.
Right. And we're not leaving ourselves alone. What I tell people to do when their grief is triggered or their heartbreak or any of these really deep, painful core feelings is I tell them to put their hands, start with putting your hands on your heart. And maybe people who are listening want to try this. Just put your hands on your heart and put your focus in your heart and breathe into your heart and get really, really present in your heart with an openness to learning about what's truly loving to that part of you that's grieving. And imagine that part of you is that child inside of you, that feeling part of you. Part of us that has our feeling is grieving. And what I tell people to do with their hands on their heart is say to that feeling part of themselves, honey, I'm right here. I'm right here. I'm not going to leave you alone. You don't have to go through this all alone. I'm here, and Spirit is here. And we'll reach out to other people as well. But I'm not going to give you away to others. I'm right here. I'm with you. And you can grieve and cry as long as you need to. I love you very much. And I'm not going to leave you alone. I'm not going to reject you or abandon you for anything that you're feeling. I'm right here, and you don't have to go through it alone. And Spirit is here helping us to move through this. And this is very comforting. And sometimes we might want to actually pick up a doll or stuffed animal. And,
sure.
and hold that and bring the comfort. That doesn't mean that we can do this alone, because part of taking loving care of ourselves is to reach out to other loving people and get held and get supported and experience their love as well. But if we're not doing it for ourselves, if we're expecting everybody else to do it for us, then we're abandoning ourselves, and nobody can do it enough. And that's true in a relationship too. If we expect somebody else to make us feel loved and worthy and safe, nobody can ever do it enough if we're abandoning ourselves, if we're judging ourselves, if we're turning to addictions, if we're staying up in our head rather than our heart, and then making somebody else responsible, then that child in us feels abandoned, feels rejected by us. It's like if you had an actual child and you went around trying to give that child away to somebody, that child would feel devastated, would feel completely abandoned. And that's what happens. That's what we do. We go around trying to find somebody to love us or take care of us or take our pain away or make it better. And when we're doing that, we're rejecting ourselves. So,
question.
Go ahead.
Do you think most adults then have abandoned themselves and they have to reconnect?
Yes, most adults have abandoned themselves.
Yeah, that's so sad that we don't have the tools when we're younger to prevent this. So
Well, yeah, we didn't have the role modeling, as I said, so most adults
right.
are
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why they turn to so many addictions, It's why people overeat or smoke or drink or watch TV or overwork or gamble or spend or have...
Yeah, right, all these bad things.
All
with your tools, as us adults, as we are learning how to take care of ourselves better through our, giving ourselves self-compassion to our wounded self, our loving adult, doing that, we'll have the tools now to hopefully at least guide our children, so maybe they won't be as in tough a shape as we were.
That's right. And it's that's a very important point you're making, Chelsea, because if we did this as adults before becoming parents, then we would be role models for our children, and they would learn to take care of their feelings as they're growing up. And I always encourage people before they have children to do their inner work, and learn how to manage their feelings so they truly can not only be there for their children, but be there for themselves. Because half of good parenting is being there for your children, but the other half is being a role model and being there for yourself so that your children learn to do that for themselves.
Sure. Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's what I teach people to do in grief, and it's very powerful when people can connect and bring that love in for themselves. And after all, that's what we need. That's what we try and get from others. We try and get their love, their compassion, their gentleness, their kindness, which is great. It's great when people give that to us, but that's got to be the icing on the cake. The cake has to be us doing that for ourselves, so that we're not being victims, and we're not expecting somebody else to do it all for us.
And we still are not taught that, or at least I will say, at least I wasn't, and the role model, the people around me. So I'm glad you have these tools to teach us as adults to do some of this.
Right. When I teach people the inner bonding process, there's two kinds of processes. As I said, there's two kinds of feelings. There's the feelings that we cause by our own self-abandonment, and this is the anxiety, the depression, guilt, shame, anger, jealousy, emptiness, aloneness. When we abandon ourselves, and then we cause these feelings. And there's basically four ways, which I've been mentioning, four ways that we abandon ourselves. One is we stay up in our head, which we all learned to do as we were growing up, because we couldn't stay in our body and tolerate what we were feeling. So we learned to go up in our head and disconnect from our body. But when we're disconnected, then we're not there for our feelings. And so now as adults, we have to learn to get back inside, get present in our body. But staying in our head is one form of self-abandonment. Self-judgment is a big one that many people have learned, because they may have been judged a lot from parents, teachers, siblings, and they just incorporated that into their own wounded self, and they end up judging themselves to try and control themselves and get themselves to do everything right so that other people will approve of them. But that's a form of self-abandonment. And then the third way is turning to various addictions, whether it's substances or activities, to avoid your feelings. And then fourth is making somebody else responsible for your feelings. So these are all ways of abandoning ourselves. And when we do any of these, we create what we call the wounded feelings, which is the anxiety and depression and guilt and shame, etc. Now, then, as I said, there's the other kind, the life feelings, the existential feelings of life, the loneliness, the heartbreak, the grief, the helplessness. These are feelings that are going to happen as a result of being alive. We're not causing them, but we still have to learn to manage them. And the problem is that, like if you're in grief and you're not lovingly managing your feelings, then you're continuing to abandon yourself. Now, not only are you in grief over a loss, but now, due to the self-abandonment, you're creating the wounded feelings. Now you're anxious. Now you're depressed. Now you're angry because of the self-abandonment. And then you likely want somebody else to come along and fix it. You want somebody to hold you, which is fine. We do need to be held, but it's very healing when somebody holds us and we're connecting with ourselves. But when somebody does it when we're abandoning ourselves, it actually doesn't do much good. It's like we're a bottomless pit. So we want somebody to come along and be in compassion and bring us the love and all the things that, of course, we need when we're in grief. But it's like pouring water into a teapot that has a hole in the bottom. It just keeps going out. It never fills up unless we're also bringing that love in. And so whether it's in grief or whether it's just in life, if we're abandoning ourselves, then no matter how much somebody else is there, how much somebody loves us, it just doesn't do it because we're already abandoning ourselves, and that's just creating too much pain. Are you
I was just absorbing what you were saying. It makes me sad that so many people go through this. But you're gonna tell us some kind of explain your process more to help us start reclaiming ourselves.
Well, what I did is, I went through the first few steps, which is, step one is tuning into your feelings. Step two is moving into an intention to learn. Step three, now, see, there's two different processes. So let me talk about the process of if we're abandoning ourselves.
Okay.
Then we go through the whole 6 steps of inner bonding. We tune into, let's say we tune in and we're feeling anxious. And then we move into an intention to learn. We move into our heart. We bring in our spiritual guidance into our heart. And then in step 3, we do a dialogue process. And we ask that anxious part of us, what am I telling you? How am I treating you that's causing this anxiety? That's taking responsibility for our feelings. So we're asking about what we're doing. How are we abandoning ourselves? That's making us feel anxious. And that anxious part might say, well, you don't even know I'm here. You ignore me all the time. I don't feel like I can count on you for anything. You're judging me all the time. You're putting me down. You're telling me I'm not good enough. You keep numbing me out with food or whatever, whatever that part might say. But if you've practiced this for a while, that anxious part or that depressed part or that guilty or shamed or angry part will let you in on what you're doing that's making you feel that way. And then in as part of step 3, we do an exploration of the wounded part of us, the ego self that is our survival. And we say, well, why are you judging yourself? What is it that you hope for by judging yourself? Or why do you need to stay up in your head all the time? Or why do you need to eat all the time? What are you avoiding? What are you trying to control? What are you trying to avoid? These are the 2 questions we ask. What are you trying to control or avoid by these forms of self-abandonment, which are really forms of controlling behavior? And so then we get a clear picture of our belief systems. We're looking for our false beliefs that are causing us to act in unloving ways. And once we get a clear picture of our false beliefs, then in step 4, we open to our higher guidance, our spiritual guidance. And we're asking 2 questions. What is the truth about these false beliefs? And what is the loving action towards ourselves? What would I need to do to be loving to myself right now? And with practice, you can actually hear the voice of Spirit talking to you or bringing in images or feelings that show you what it is that you're needing to do. And then in step 5, we take the loving action. Like, let's say Spirit says, what would be loving is to start accepting yourself instead of judging yourself all the time. Well, then the loving action would be to start to notice the self-judgments and to, not allow ourselves to keep going there all the time. We can't stop something we're not aware of. So the loving action would be to become more and more aware of judging ourselves and why are we judging ourselves or why are we making other people responsible? What are we avoiding? What are we trying to control? And really becoming more and more aware And then, and the loving action may be all kinds of things in step 5. It may be, to change our diet or get more sleep or get more exercise or speak our truth to somebody or, it's all kinds of things that it could be to take loving care of ourselves. And then once we take some loving action, we go inside and in step 6, and we evaluate how we're feeling as a result of that loving action. And if we're feeling lighter, if we're feeling some relief, then we know that we're taking better care of ourselves. We're taking more loving care of ourselves. If we still feel really bad, then we have to go through the steps again until we find the loving action. So,
I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
For this process, could you, like for a grieving person, they're going to be telling themselves, they're going to be judging themselves, let's pretend, I should be over this by now. And they're probably not really thinking that, but that's the pressure they're getting from the outside.
Uh-huh.
Or, why aren't I feeling better now? Right. They're putting those non-authentic thoughts onto themselves. So could you take us through that example quickly? Like how would a person, or, a typical thing they would say to themselves that's not helpful?
Yeah, so let's just take that. Let's say that they are telling themselves, well, I should be over this by now. What's wrong with me that I'm not over this by now? I'm moving on with my life. So the first thing that they might be aware of is that they're feeling anxious. They're feeling tense. Mm-hmm. Because that kind of judgment is going to create a tension inside.
Yeah. Okay.
And so in step 1, they become aware that they're feeling anxious. Then they ask themselves, well, what am I telling you that's making you feel anxious? You move into the intention to learn. You bring in your guidance. What am I telling you that's making you feel anxious? And the anxious part says, you're telling me I should be over this by now. Now, anytime there's a should, we know that's coming from the wounded self.
Okay.
So then we go into the wounded part and say, where did you get that belief? Why do you believe that we should be over this by now? This was a hugely traumatic and devastating life situation for me. It's going to take me a long time to get over it. Why do you believe we should be over it? And so the wounded self might say, well, other people are going to judge me, or other people aren't going to like me, or just whatever it is that the belief is about it. And then once we get an understanding of what the belief system is as to why we're telling ourselves that, then we would go to our higher guidance and say, what's the truth about that? Should I be over it by now? Or is it okay that I'm still really in a lot of grief? Well, our guidance would always say, there is no should. It's going to take whatever time it's going to take. There is no time limit. There is no should. And if other people are judging you, what are you telling yourself about that? Are you telling yourself that they know better than you, or that if they're judging you, you're not okay? Or what's the belief about that? That if people are saying you should be over this by now, and so there's a lot to explore. But our guidance will never say something to us that is about a judgment or about a should. This should happen or that should happen. Our guidance will always say, just be with where you are with a lot of compassion. Where you are is where you need to be. And just be there with a lot of love and compassion. And so once we bring that in, then at least the anxiety about it will go away. The grief will still be there, but the anxiety about it will go away.
So kind of we're working at the unauthentic feeling to try to resolve that and make that go away.
Right, so that we can just truly be here for ourselves. There's some losses in life. Like, to me, the loss of a child, for example, is just a huge, 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 huge loss. And for a person to expect themselves to move through that quickly is completely and totally unrealistic. It's one of the hardest losses there is. And people need to accept that. They need to accept that this is, a true trauma a huge, huge, giant loss, and to give themselves plenty of time, plenty of love, plenty of compassion from themselves, from others. If anybody comes in and says, well, should be over this by now, that we don't need that person.
Right.
We should be spending time with that person.
Mhm.
And that's part of being loving to ourselves, is to decide
Sure.
who's going to be supportive, who's going to understand, and who's going to tell us, get a grip and move on.
Yeah. And what about, let me ask you one other question. I think a common worry, fear, problem that people have when someone passes away is they always question, is my loved one okay? Are they okay? How would you help them with that question through this process? Because that to me, that seems like a fear-based question, because our spiritual guidance would say, yes, they're okay, they're in heaven, they're a spiritual being. So just take us through the process one more time, and I won't ask you to do it again.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'm happy to do it. Of course we want to know that. The thing is that the more we practice opening to learning with our guidance, the more we can actually connect with and feel the soul essence of our loved one. People have this experience all the time. It may come through a dream. It may come, when they're walking out in nature, when they least expect it. But many, many people have the experience of communicating with their loved one, and then they know firsthand that their loved one is okay. And somebody telling them that is not the same thing as having the experience of that. And so that's why really developing that spiritual connection is so important. I grew up in a family where that kind of thing was considered almost mental illness, like, it was a crutch, and people made this up. And, it was really, my parents were not only atheists, but they put down anything to do with God or spirituality or the idea of the soul transcending the body. And so it's very sad to me because they were really scared to die because of their belief system. But I had to move beyond that. I had to let go of all that. I was kind of fortunate in that when I was 6 years old, I got into bed one night, and right after I got into bed, my soul left my body and went up to the ceiling and touched the ceiling, and I felt this enormous sense of peace that came over me. And I knew from that point on, I stayed up at the ceiling for, 15, 20 minutes, and then my body slowly came back down. My soul slowly came back down into my body. And I never told my parents because they would have completely ridiculed me. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know it was an out-of-body experience. I just knew that I knew from then on that my body and my soul were separate. And then in my early 20s, I had a whole series of out-of-body experiences. And then that's when I started doing research and realized, okay, this is what had happened. And, the soul can transcend the body. The soul is not the body, and I knew for sure. But, if people haven't had an experience of transcending their body that way, they can still know. They can still connect with their beloved by staying very, very open-hearted, open to learning. Now, the other thing that I want to bring up is that one of the hardest feelings in life is the feeling of helplessness. When we were really little and we cried, and if nobody came, we could have died. And we were so helpless. We couldn't get up and get food and call a friend. We couldn't do anything. We were just helpless. We were helpless over ourselves. We were helpless over others. As we grow up, we're still helpless over others, but we're no longer helpless over ourselves. But the feeling of helplessness gets connected to a life and death feeling, because if nobody had come, we would have died. And so it's a really, really hard feeling to feel. Well, when we lose somebody, that gets triggered. Especially if it's, sometimes if people get sick and and it's a prolonged situation, and we know the person's going to die, then we can manage it better. But if somebody suddenly dies, very often a person will say, well, if only I had not let them do this, or if only I had done this differently, if only I had done that differently. And that's the defense against the helplessness, you see. And that's really harmful to us, to think that it's like playing God, that we could have done something different, that if only we had done this, if only we had done that. And people drive themselves crazy, saying, well, if only I'd done this, this wouldn't have happened. Well, when we accept our helplessness, it did happen, and that's the way it is, and there's nothing we can do about it. And as much as we wish we would have done something else, we didn't. And it's the way it is. And as soon as we accept, fully accept our helplessness over the situation, that's going to make it a whole lot easier to move through the grief. Because one of the ways we keep ourselves very stuck is by berating ourselves. If only I had done this, if only I had done that.
And for accepting that we are helpless, it's so hard to do.
It is. It's really hard. It's a huge, huge challenge to accept our helplessness. Not just over somebody dying that we love. People have a hard time with it all the time in life, like in relationships. Somebody does something you don't like, and you want to control them. You want to get them not to do it. And people have a very hard time accepting that they don't have that control over other people, that they're helpless over who somebody chooses to be, how somebody treats themselves, how they treat you, that they're helpless over other people, but they're not helpless over themselves. And this is where inner bonding comes in, because we're not helpless to move into acceptance of ourselves, to move into acceptance of reality, to move into love and move into compassion for ourselves and for each other. We're not helpless over that choice. The essence of free will is our choice of our intention to protect against pain with our controlling behavior, or to learn to love ourselves and share our love with others. That is the essence of our free will. We get to choose that moment by moment, and we are not helpless over that choice, but we are helpless over what choices anybody else makes for themselves.
That is so helpful to explain the distinction, because probably everyone who hasn't worked through therapy or techniques like this thinks otherwise. So
right, that's right, and that keeps them stuck.
Mhm.
I mean, we get it. This is the essence of the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. When we keep banging our head against the wall, trying to change somebody else or change a situation by saying, if only I had done this, if only I had done that, there's no serenity, because we're not accepting reality at that point. But once we really accept what we cannot change, then we're free to change what we can, which is really ourselves, how we treat ourselves, how we treat others.
And for this acceptance of what we can't change, how can people help themselves do that? Explain that again.
Well, first, the first thing is that we have to name what it is that's happening. We have to say, oh, I see. I am not willing to accept my helplessness. Naming helplessness is very, very helpful.
Okay.
For me, when I'm agitated about something, and then I say, oh, I see what's happening. I'm trying to control something that I can't control. I have to accept my helplessness. Right away, I start to feel better. And then once I've named it, then I can move into compassion again, you see. Then I can open to guidance and say, oh, help me to be, I can put my hands in my heart, help me to be in compassion for this helplessness, because it's really hard It's a really, really hard feeling. And I don't want to abandon myself in this feeling. I don't want to avoid it by being in my head or, turning to an addiction or judging myself or making somebody else responsible. I don't want to abandon myself because I'm trying to avoid my helplessness. I want to be very kind and very gentle and very compassionate towards this feeling of helplessness so that I can let it move through me and not get stuck in me.
Okay.
So then it's the same process.
And for these concepts, I think people will have to tell us the names of some of your books and how they can reach you on inner bonding, because I can see why you need so much practice to do this.
Yeah, well, they can go to innerbonding.com, which is a very big site. There's a place there where they can take a free course and learn the basics of the inner bonding process. We have a store there where they can access the books, Inner Bonding, Healing Your Aloneness, Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by God? Do I Have to Give Up Me to Be Loved by You? These are some of the books. We have courses. We have a wonderful course called Love Yourself, which is a 30-day at-home course. It takes people about 15 or 20 minutes a day, and they get taught in quite a deep level the inner bonding process. We have a course called Frequency, which helps people to connect with their spiritual guidance and develop that connection. Again, an at-home 30-day course. We have a wonderful program called SelfQuest, which is a very, very in-depth program. It's a big program. It's a program you download onto your computer, and you can go into it at any time, and it takes you through the inner bonding process. It's something people can use anytime they're upset about anything. And people have said it's like having me in their living room.
Oh.
So it's kind of like that. It's kind of like a therapist on your computer. And so there's many ways of learning inner bonding. I work with people on Skype and the phone. I do 5-day intensives with small groups. I do workshops. There's a lot of ways of people getting help. We have a wonderful membership site with 4 levels depending on the benefits that you want, starting at $9.95 and going up to $49.95, and the 3 upper levels actually have some free sessions with inner bonding facilitators in training, and that's a really good way of getting some help. It's the least expensive way of working one-to-one with somebody who's had experience and who's training in the inner bonding process. So. And the website is a group of very, very compassionate people. There's forums, there's chats, there's a lot of things, a lot of ways of getting support, getting help. And so, part of being loving to oneself is finding that help and support, whether it's our website or a grief support group, to reach out and get the help and support that you need.
And I must say I'm actually in your 30-day course now for frequency, and that's very helpful. And I've met a lot of your people who are certified in inner bonding, and like you're saying, very compassionate, helpful process, or helpful to get their support. So that's awesome. And I know we're getting to the end of our time, but let me ask you one more question. For how we're talking about getting into our spiritual connection, raising our frequency. Can you give us just a couple more tips on how to do that?
Well, it's really, like I said, it's about being open. And the thing that opens is your intention. Now, the thing is that we're helpless over another person's intention. Anytime we decide that we want to open to learning about loving ourselves, we raise our frequency. Now, there's a whole lot of other ways. There's meditation, there's prayer, there's being out in nature, there's listening to music, there's playing with an animal, there's going to a 12-step meeting, there's sharing with a friend, there's getting help, and there's a lot of ways. But unless your intention is to learn, actually none of those are going to do it enough to access your your higher guidance. So moving into the intention as well as moving into your imagination. I ask people to imagine, that older, wiser self, and just use your imagination to imagine that older, wiser self. And when you move into an intention to learn and you imagine, and then you put on some spiritual music, and then you pray, or then you walk in nature, or then you draw or paint or do something creative, or all of these other ways, then all of these other things will help you further raise your frequency. But it's really vital to understand. I've worked with people who have prayed and meditated for years and years and still can't connect because they didn't consciously move into an intention to learn about loving themselves. So that's the real key. And then, of course, all of these other experiences will help and support you.
And for setting that intention, can someone simply say, I want to learn about loving myself? Is it as easy as that?
Well, yes, it is, but they have to mean it.
Right, yeah, okay.
Yeah, they have to really mean it. It can't be something in their head. They have to. It has to be something they really want. They really want to be loving to themselves. They have to find that place in them that really wants to do that. They can't just say it. Okay.
So it could be, too, when you're in the when you're healing, when you're grieving for your loved one, that pain is so intense that could be an intention that I want to get out of this pain. I want to remember the good times. I want to feel that person's spirit. So that could maybe be a motivator to set that intention. Would that sound correct to you?
It could, yes. Sometimes, very often, it's the desire to get out of pain that motivates people to do their inner work and move into the desire to be loving to themselves.
Sure. And then also, we had, or I should say you have, a little gift for the people who are on the call. So let me tell them about that a little, and it's called Dear God, How Can I Heal So That I May Love? And it's an e-book basically to help all the listeners through the profound healing process. And let me give everyone the URL for that. And it is called, you just go to, correct me if I'm wrong, but innerbonding.com/welcome/dear_God. So innerbonding.com/welcome/dear_God. Or dear_God. And I went to it earlier today and pulled it up, no problem with that address. And it's very helpful. I had read through it already. So it kind of talks about how to love yourself. Like you give people even more guidance. So that will be some nice help for the people as well.
Good.
And then one more thing. I keep saying that, one more thing. What would be your final message to the people who are grieving on how to help themselves? I know we really focused on setting that intention. Any last one piece of wisdom you'd want to share with everyone?
Yeah, the thing is that it's love that heals, and that's what we have to keep in mind. It's love that heals. Nothing else is healing like love. And so when you know that love heals, then you know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that when you really open to loving yourself and bringing that love in from your higher guidance, you will eventually heal, because love does heal.
That is so beautiful. That gives you so much hope by just explaining it that simply. So, Margaret, I want to thank you for your time today being on the call. You gave us some awesome tools. And again, people can learn more about you and all your techniques at innerbonding.com. And one last thing, we do have a lot of speakers providing a lot of great information. All the recordings are available up to 48 hours in case you can't listen live when the speaker is on. But we also have the recordings available for sale if you want to preserve all the information and tools that we're learning. So thanks again, Margaret. We very much appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Chelsea. You take care.
Yes, everyone, too. Take care. Thanks again.